All right, guys, so this is going to be a series on grief. It may be in 2 parts or maybe in 3, but I'm finding that having shorter videos gives someone just enough to digest, and then they can decide whether or not they want to move on to the next video or if they're ready for that. I would suggest that with each video, you give yourself a little bit of time to process if you need it. Maybe revisit the video, just kind of let things sink in a little more, especially if there's channeling involved in it. And most often there is going to be some channeling involved because it's me. Um, but we are talking about grief today. Spirit definitely wanted to touch on that. And it was a suggestion for a video from another friend that I really dearly love. Um, and it's odd because today is the anniversary of the passing of my namesake, my grandmother, Kay. And she was the maternal figure in my life. She was really a mother to me. And in fact, I called her mom. And so it's kind of ironic that on the anniversary of her passing, which changed my life forever and even affected me just in ways that still kind of baffle me, I just think it's really fitting. So I guess I'll start with some of the elements that were involved in her passing and touch on them in a general sense. So first of all, as humans, we always want to know how long something is going to take. We want to have some sense of organization and control and of knowing when something is going to happen. Particularly if we are in pain, we want to know when that pain is going to end, when something is going to release and give to where we don't have to feel this way anymore. So when we talk about frequencies, energetic frequencies that we can feel and vibrate at, because everything is made of energy, there is certainly a spectrum that relates to emotions that we feel. And in my experience, shame and guilt are of the lowest vibrational frequencies on that spectrum. They're incredibly damaging. Grief is a step above those two for me, as far as what I've experienced with working with clients. But, grief often brings up feelings of shame and guilt because it's completely normal to review the relationship that we had with them, whether it's a complicated dynamic and we're feeling that maybe they should have felt some of those aspects if they didn't treat us well, or if we are assessing how good we performed, how well we performed in their life, no matter what the dynamic was. Those feelings can certainly be brought up. And when you're feeling some really heavy emotions, like the ones associated with grief and going through the grief process, of course, you're going to want to know when that crazy roller coaster of a devastating ride is going to end. The thing is, you are in the process of not only processing their passing, but of facing your own mortality at the same time. When someone that you love or someone that you really deeply care for passes away, no matter what the situation, and oftentimes it can be even harder in some aspects if you had a difficult relationship with them, because it brings up all the different hurts in a different way. It's kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off and everything is so incredibly raw, except now you can't confront them about any of these things. You can't have a conversation with them. They've transitioned. And so you're left with all of that. And so there are many dynamics involved in relation to the person, but also you're dealing with your own emotions and what this passing reflects to you. But then in the most simplest of terms, you're dealing with loss. That's going to shake up anyone's world. And, spirit does not operate with the measurement of time. They don't give a fuck about time. Their concern is, what are you taking from this process? How are you caring for yourself? How are you perceiving the process? Because a lot of times you have to go through the sludge and the darkness to process what was supposed to come out of it, as far as what you were to glean from having gone through it. Does it propel you to hold life that much more dear and the people around you that much more dear? Or is it teaching you to be guarded or to be afraid of loss and maybe not wanting to get closer to other people? Um, because others will never be like them. It's going to be hard not to compare others to them. Or in other situations, maybe you don't trust anymore if it was a difficult relationship. You can also deal with feelings of being betrayed and left behind, and dealing with feelings of abandonment, which are totally normal. And these emotions, I mean, there are so many more involved in grief, and you can go bouncing like a bullet that ricochets between all of them at differing times. And just when you think that you have gotten to a certain place or you're having an okay day, you can be plunged right back down into the deep waters of the emotions that you thought maybe you were finally moving past. And that is incredibly normal. And so when we are healing, especially when it comes to grief and loss, there are, because this is such a deep process, pockets of trauma, pockets of emotions, and it's several layers deep, several layers deep. Um, and so when you deal with a layer, that layer will release. But maybe there's 7 or 8 more below it. And those will come in time. They'll be revealed and brought to the surface for you to deal with when you're ready to. You may not feel ready, but spirit will dictate that you're ready. Spirit tends to know more than we do what we are actually ready for, because we tend to, as humans, really get in our own way with our fears and self-limitations. But I want to talk about, allowing yourself all of the time that you need. And that can be hard when other people are expecting you to move on. Oh, it's been a year. Why haven't you gotten over this? Or, maybe you should get out there and start dating again. Or, I feel like this has really impacted your life to a point where you're not living anymore and you're just really kind of bringing us all down. People make comments like that or try to push you into doing things before you're ready, or they don't at all understand your grieving process, and in trying to be well-meaning, they end up sticking their foot in their mouth and really triggering you, making statements pertaining to how you should deal with it or how you should feel. And sometimes people even tend to compare their grief to yours and say, well, you lost your husband, but I lost my husband and both of my kids. Or comparing it to any other situation. And sometimes people will say things that are just completely asinine when they are comparing their grief to yours, but what they've experienced is nowhere near your experience. And while I say pain is pain, there is certainly a difference between losing your life partner and, having a loss with someone that maybe wasn't as close. Grief is grief, yes, and we shouldn't be comparing, really, because everyone handles things differently and everyone is coming from a different place when they experience that loss. But there are things that you don't say. And a lot of times, listening is the best thing when someone has incurred loss. But you are dealing with all of those emotions, and other people dealing with your emotions or not dealing with them or expecting you to rush through them to make them comfortable. And you may even be dealing with people pulling away because they don't know how to deal with you now that you are grieving, because maybe it feels too heavy for them or they don't know what to say. So this can be quite the shit show. But going within and allowing yourself, really giving yourself permission to feel everything that you feel, not placing a time limit on things, and especially if the situation was difficult. I did say that I was going to touch on one of the elements with my grandmother. My grandma died, but there was an added element of domestic violence being involved in her passing. And when you find out that someone was going through that in secret and you didn't know about it, and they took care of you and loved you, it brings all kinds of emotions up to the surface, and then anger with the person that had a hand in their passing, especially if it's a family member. So grief is complicated, and it's unique to every single person who goes through it. Everyone will be exactly where they need to be in the time that they need to be there. Wherever you are in your grief, you are right on time, and you need to really feel into that and honor it and not push yourself. And sure as hell, Don't allow anyone to push you. Um, However many layers you have to go through for each emotion and each aspect, especially if the situation was really complicated or it was a difficult relationship, you're going to need all the more time and patience and absolutely compassion and care for yourself in moving through it. It will be one of the biggest challenges with being patient with yourself if that's not your strong suit, especially if you're a go-getter and you push through things, or um, you've had to really make things comfortable for other people in your life. Um, so it's really important that you just surrender to this process, because when you have incurred loss, and it doesn't matter what that loss pertains to or who you lose, it changes you. You have changed as a person, and you not only have to deal with the grieving process, but figuring out who you are now, how you've changed after this experience. And you know what? It's all okay. However you move through that process is okay. However long you take with that process is okay. You are an individual. What you experience is individual and will require its own process and time, and no one can dictate that for you. And having a support system is incredibly important, but some people do not have that. And so that's where you end up having to be your own support system and really trying hard to support yourself through the process. This is not easy. There is really no manual that gives a blanket solution for how to grieve. But there are some steps that you can take, such as looking up the grief process, the different stages, and understanding what those are, and knowing that you don't move linearly through it. It's not a linear process. You can go from stage 1 to stage 5 to stage 3, back to stage 5 to stage 1 to stage 2. You literally will bounce back between those stages. They don't go in order. And however you need to go through the grieving process is based on how you grew up, based on your DNA as well. And I'll touch on that probably in the next video with epigenetics. But however you are processing is the way that you need to process it. And it can bring up so many emotions, including anger and rage, even with that person. And you should never feel guilty or like you're a bad person or that you're not doing this right. Throw all of that out the window, because whatever you're feeling is coming up for a reason, and those feelings are valid. Give yourself permission to feel them. There's nothing wrong with you if you are feeling emotions that other people may judge as being inappropriate for the situation. If people are judging you for how you're grieving, distance yourself from them, because they are not going to help you. They are not good for you in the moment. There is a caveat to that. I will say, if you are in a space where you are self-sabotaging your own health, you're kind of spiraling downward, there probably should be people stepping in and saying, hey, I only mean you well. I noticed that you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're drinking a whole bunch, or you're relying on pills, or you've really gone within and not talked to really anybody, not reaching out at all. And that can be, for a while, very appropriate, because sometimes we really need to be in the silence and away from the voices of others just to try and get some kind of handle on what the hell it is that we are feeling. But know that this is your process and you can own it in any way that you need to. No one can really tell you that you should be at a certain point by a certain time. And if they do, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, because this is your process. This has happened to you. This has happened to you. And you have the right to process it and deal with it however you need to. And that's okay. All of it's okay. It just brings up so many different elements, dealing with the grief, but also trying to figure out who you are now that you've incurred this loss. And it can be felt on so many different levels. And grief is hard because people can absolutely die from something called broken heart syndrome. And I'm sure that you've probably heard about the old couples who have been together for a really long time, and then the wife or the husband dies, and then 2 days later, the husband or the wife who lost their spouse goes, or they make it maybe a year later or 6 months later. So that's a real thing. So in the next video, we're going to talk about epigenetics and more about broken heart syndrome, okay? So I will see you there.